one question is, what is it like? I mean, you don't come from a political background, right? Was anybody in your family ever in politics?
No.
So you don't come from a political background, and then you're a congressman. You don't even start with like mayor or town council or anything like that. You just go for it. So what is it like? What is that? What is that shift in your life and your awareness and your mindset, and if there is one, and who you are, going from entrepreneur, farmer, dad, husband to still all of those things, but now congressman?
It's a huge shift, and nothing really can prepare you for it. It's the reason that my wife and I decided to pursue this. And again, we didn't know a single person. We didn't know a single elected official. We didn't know a single person in the party committees. And I jokingly say I got tired of throwing things at the TV, and I feel like our nation needs better leaders. And I showed up and I said, I want to run for Congress. I'm not going to lie. I was told that you can't. It's not your turn. And I said, well, my turn started 32 years ago when I volunteered to serve in the Navy. So if there's somebody been sitting around for 32 years, let me know. Otherwise, I think it's my turn. And so we did it all the grassroots way. I mean, Stephanie, my beautiful wife, went out and got more than 700 signatures to get on the ballot. Typically somebody might get 10 or 15 or 20. She got more than 700. And then we had a lot of volunteers, and then we had a lot more volunteers, and people just liked the authentic message. They liked that I didn't come from politics. And, but it's a big shift. And, most days if somebody walked in and said, hi, Congressman, I would look around and, who are they talking to? But at the same time, it is important, the people have hired me to do this job, and I need to show up and make sure that I show up and I fulfill the role of representing them in Congress and, to the best of my ability. So we sacrificed everything to do this. I sold my farm equipment and we wrote a $6,000 check to our campaign, which I had to, pay ourselves back before the end of the campaign because we had to pay our school taxes. And, I had to walk away from my software business and a huge ownership in that. And anyway, all of those things made it a great sacrifice. But it's an honor to get to do it. I can't say it's fun. If you want to have fun, I encourage people to do something else. But it's an honor, and I think these are unusual times in our history. So, we're here to serve.
You find, you just talking about the service to the country, service to the people who've hired you, sounds very similar to what I imagine you take your military career, right? Service to the country, which, myself being out in Killeen, Texas, worked at a church out there where 95% of the people, maybe even 100%, were either current or former military or their families. And actually, who I just had on the podcast? We were talking spirits before this. Madison County Distillery. I don't know if you know Mike Basla, who's the owner out there.
I'm pretty sure I met him at a, one of the fairs, one of the events that we went by, and I'm like, hey, I got to come see you guys. Yeah. So I need to get out there.
He is retired lieutenant general in the Air Force.
Oh, he left that part out in our conversation.
Yeah. And I forget how many years he put in, but he was at the Pentagon for the last stretch of his career, and family here, and they, it's his whole family, his daughters and son-in-laws. They're all involved in the family business out there with Madison County Distillery. It's pretty interesting. But talking to him about just that sense of service and duty to the country, serving in the military, seeing the sacrifice that military, families and men and women make, it's very humbling to see that. And so how do you, I sense from things I've read, interviews I've seen you give before, you have that same sense of service and duty to the country as serving in the Navy. How does that connect to you being a congressman? Do you kind of approach it the same way or have the same feeling toward it?
Very much the same way. It is, I think about, people that are listening to this, that are potentially in the food industry, that are in the hospitality industry, that are in agriculture, maybe farm to table, once you learn to follow your passion and really identify where your giftedness is, and what gets you up in the morning, the earlier you learn that, the better, particularly if you learn a craft, if you really learn how to deliver value and make a living off of it. And so one of the things that I've discovered after a career in business, now, of course, I started my career in military service, and it was very important to me. I was not I didn't go to the service academies. I didn't have a ROTC scholarship. I was a volunteer. And that decision came after I'd been in China and had been witness to the student protests in Tiananmen Square in May of 1989. And then I spent the next year as a visiting student at Harvard University for Asian Studies and Chinese Studies. And it was in the middle of that first semester, there were a number of the student leaders had fled. This was, of course, after the crackdown. And they had fled to Harvard. And one of them was my tutor. And there was something that stirred in me that just I decided I was going to volunteer to serve in the Navy and sought out the nuclear submarine program. And that was a great decision for me. I wish I would have listened a little bit more deeply at the time, because that sense of duty is a very strong motivator for me, and also a sense of utility, being useful. And I certainly got that in my military service. Now, I was very fortunate to meet Stephanie when I was a young naval officer. And in fact, I met her at you mentioned you worked at a church. I met her at a Bible study, and I proposed 8 weeks later. So I always tell people, keep your daughters away from sailors. That's the important lesson there.
And Christians.
Yeah. They're moving fast. And so, but her father was a career Army officer and was an Army colonel. So I was a Navy ensign proposing to the Army colonel's daughter. So Stephanie has now outranked me for 32 years. And, her father served in Vietnam for two tours. He was at the Battle of Quai San in 1968 during the Tet Offensive, the worst place literally on the planet to be. In 1968, he earned 3 Bronze Stars with Combat V. Wow. And as a young girl, Stephanie, her father was stationed in Germany, and Stephanie remembers the alerts, in the middle of the night, and all the soldiers and her dad putting on his combat boots and running out the door, and not seeing him for 4 or 5 days, and not knowing, what was going on, because they were right at the place where they expected the Soviet Union to come into Western Europe. And so there is a sense of identity around protecting the nation, about serving the nation, that resonates with her, and it resonated with me. Congress is very much like that, and I think my sense of calling to run for this office and to serve this community comes from that same place. And getting back to, people that make a decision to, start a small farm, which we've done, or to open up a restaurant. Thankfully, we've not done that, although my wife is a great in hospitality.
Don't do it.
It's so hard. But the thing about running for this office, it is that same sense of duty and utility. And I think I can bring, I'm the only nuclear engineer in Congress. I have an extensive technology background in the private sector. And I get a sense that I can add something to the conversation. And politics is a very nasty business. So, the intrinsic rewards, you would think, it's like, it's like being a restaurant owner the first, 3 or 4 years. It is all a grind. And, if you survive that long, then you will, everybody says, oh, what a star. And they don't remember the first 3 or 4 years. Well, politics is a grind. Yeah. And, but I'm honored to get to do it.
It's, I just had somebody send me a DM on Instagram maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And he said, I'm currently a teacher, and I forget where he was, somewhere in Western New York. He said, I'm currently a teacher, been a teacher for like 10 years, obsessed with the restaurant industry, really want to open up my own food truck to start and then get my own restaurant. I'm curious, what advice can you give me on starting a food truck and documenting it? And so I said, well, advice on starting a food truck or advice on starting a food truck and document it. He said, let's start with advice on starting a food truck. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and then I wrote back and I said, don't do it unless it's the only thing that you can possibly think about. You can't sleep at night because you're just constantly thinking about the food you make and what your menu is going to be and the name of it and how you're going to be successful. And if it's the only thing that consumes you, then you shouldn't start a food truck. Because talking to so many restaurant owners, food truck owners, people that get into the food service business, brewery, whatever the case is, it is such an incredible, like you said, grind. It's so challenging, especially nowadays, especially here in Central New York. It's incredibly difficult. And people that I know that it could be their first year, it could be their 20th year. They're still in a very similar position of trying to figure out a way to make it work. And that's actually, it's a lot of business owners that I've talked to, not just in hospitality. It can be an incredibly lonely space. Especially if you don't have some sort of a support or a friend group that's in the similar position as you are, other restaurant owners or business owners, it can be very, very challenging. It's something I've learned. I kind of always felt like with my business, I was like kind of had it easy on the outside of that a little bit. But even now, as I've progressed, I've had this now for 8 years and full time for 3. I'm kind of seeing that also. It can be very challenging in the food because it's so up and down. Now, traveling around the state, I definitely see that in all different areas, but it feels like it is a little bit more concentrated here in Central New York than it is in, like I go out to Rochester or Buffalo, and not to say that it's like any easier there, but it is a very different mindset, even just an hour to the west in the restaurant industry than it is here in Central New York. And I don't know why that is. You going into Congress, what was that like in the very beginning? Did it feel very lonely? Were there other senior, congressmen and women that were there to kind of welcome you and, hey, here's how it works. And we go here on Tuesday and this is what's expected of you. Was there a training manual that you got walked through, or was it just, here's the keys to the office and we'll see you at roll call?
It was somewhere in between. It's a little bit like, how much truth do you want here? It is, they do make a good effort to, prepare you with the basics because, you're standing up, multiple offices, right? I have an office in Utica, I have an office in Syracuse, and then, of course, my Washington, D.C. office. And you're standing up a staff. So, you're hiring 12 to 15 to 16 people and that are expected to fulfill a role for you, right? That's how you're going to, meet the constituent services and service them. That's how you're going to run your legislative agenda. That's how you're going to, schedule your day, which is a very unenviable task. Mm-hmm. And so it definitely took some orientation, and they put together, kind of a, preschool for freshman congressmen that you go through. And after the election, there's a couple of weeks, and it's very helpful. But, back to the truth, politics can be a very lonely business in the sense that everyone's looking out for themselves. And it's very transactional. It's not nearly as, collegial or relational as you would think. And so that was a bit of a, reorientation. And, a lot of people have previous connections and networks in politics, and I had none. And so, but for me as an outsider, that was a good way. I wouldn't have it any other way, because I got to be myself and figure out my own way. One of the key lessons is that you need to have good people around you, and that took some time, to figure out, who can you trust, who's really helping you succeed. And then I came up with a framework. Again, I'm a nuclear engineer, so I'm always looking for, structure, reason, repeatable, sort of processes. And I drew 5 circles all around, like 5 points on a star. Mm-hmm. And at the top, I put my life, right? That's my marriage, that's my health, that's my sanity. And, that's one of the main things I have to, manage. The second is being an effective member. So, as a member of Congress, you are individually, responsible for a lot. You're responsible for your relationship with your colleagues. You're responsible for your brand. You're responsible for what committees you're on. I, as a congressman, I have my own, almost like a little business. Mm-hmm. And then the next one is an effective office. And that is constituent services. That is when people come to D.C. that they can get a tour. Mm-hmm. That is the administration of 3 different offices and a staff of 15 or so. So you have an administrative managerial function because your office has to work well. The part that nobody likes, at least nobody that I know, is a fourth circle, which is fundraising, particularly in a competitive seat like mine. It feels like a full-time job, and sometimes, some days it is. But that's a reality of modern politics. Yeah. Everybody hates money in politics, but there is money in politics. So fundraising is a major part of the job. And then the last one is the campaign. I'm on a 2-year cycle, and so I'm up for re-election all the time. You have a campaign staff, by the way, which is completely separate, and you run a campaign organization. And so those are the 5 circles, and they orbit around, whatever your central mission is. And, my mission statement that I said to my team very early on is to love and serve the people of Central New York. And so all 5 of those circles are to support that mission. And again, if I'm truthful, there's a very large number of people in politics whose the center of their mission is to raise money, get on TV, and get reelected, and sort of have their political career. And that's all of those 5 circles center around those simple goals for them. And but anyway, that structure helped me a lot.
I would typically, when I was thinking about your position in politics and government and that connection to Central New York, to your district and its people. And I was trying to think of how does that really, play a role? I remember talking to Mayor Ben Walsh 4-6 years ago, somewhere. I think maybe it was his first term running. And I asked him, because I remember when former Mayor Stephanie Miner was in office, there were things, and it's so easy for somebody like me to sit here and see news clips, read headlines, have our own interpretation of what's happening in government or politics, and then really at the end of the day have zero clue what's actually happening. But I just remember Mayor Stephanie Miner. It was something about Syracuse with a refugee city, whatever the heck it was called. And that got national attention. I remember moving back, going into the next race. I was thinking, man, I don't want to see my mayor of the city I live in on Fox or CNN. Stay in your lane. And so I remember asking, Mayor Walsh about that, and his response was, my job is to make sure trash is picked up on time. There's firefighters when they're needed, police officers. That's my goal. That's my job, and I have to do that properly, and I have to be focused on that, and that's it. And I love that response. I still think about that response all the time, and thinking about jobs and what is my real job here. But when I think about your position, I think almost it's how much of effect do you have on the day-to-day life of people in the district, or is it more of your, maybe this is a terrible example, but you're more of the Iron Dome, so to speak, for the district, in Washington, trying to make sure there aren't major things that happen that can, affect the people in your district in a negative way. But then I also think of Micron and, your role in that, especially in the development of it. So with that being said, how do you feel when you're in Washington on a day-to-day basis and thinking of, okay, I'm representing my district, but I'm here and I'm also, involved in things that are on a national level?
A good way to break this down, I think, is, Mayor Walsh and the county executive, Ryan McMahon, those are the governor, the president. Those are executive jobs. They manage an enormous budget. They manage an enormous staff, and they are providing services, at different scales. I mean, Ryan McMahon's a great example because he, delivers so much for the county that makes a huge impact, including Micron. I hold him chiefly responsible for bringing Micron here. And so, clearly he has, a different role. I'm a legislator, and my budget's very small by comparison, and my staff is very, very small by comparison. But there are things that happen in Washington, D.C. that have a huge impact on our lives. And the open southern border has clearly had a huge impact. It impacts crime here. The tax policy matters a lot, particularly, like the SALT cap and those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
What happens overseas? Are we deterring our enemies? Right. I was the strategic missile officer on a Trident submarine. How we stand up to China, how we support our allies like Israel or the Ukraine, those matter a lot to the overall safety. I mean, the United States going to war and being engaged in war affects all of us. And, we have people who have children serving in the military. Our taxes go to those things. So, there is sort of a, you said Iron Dome. It's interesting. There's Iron Dome, and then there's David's Sling, and then above that is Arrow 3 for the, things outside the exo-atmospheric.
It's funny. I have friends who are missionaries in Jerusalem, and have been for the exception of a year or two during COVID. They've been there for maybe the last 8 years, and you just mentioning that, they've talked about that before, but. Even just them, even if it's not a direct attack or something, the fact that the amount of pictures and things they post whenever there isn't something that's happening in the vicinity of them having to go to bomb shelters or, safe spaces, it's crazy.
Well, my Israeli friends, when something happens, they immediately text their family members, "I'm okay, I'm at this location." Because, it's a small country. Everybody knows where the suicide bomber was or where the, drone missile impact was. And so there's this flurry of information just saying, everybody knows that this happened, whatever it was, and I'm okay, I wasn't there, or, and, that's a big part of their culture. But, in terms of Congress, there's also things that I am able to do directly for our district. So for example, there's $45 million of funding for specific projects in our community. I'm able to find those federal programs and match it with local municipalities and their priorities. Down in Hamilton, for example, they were the state was paying for the main highway through Hamilton to be ripped up, and so the mayor of Hamilton said, can you help us get funding to replace the water line that's old underneath? We haven't budgeted for it. We're working on it, but we don't want to put in a new road and then go dig it up and replace the water line. Yeah. And I said, look, that's just good governance. There's not 6 Republicans down in Hamilton, so I'm not doing it for political reasons. It's just good governance. So there's a lot of infrastructure projects, support for the police, and some of their things, emergency management vehicle for the Onondaga County. So being able to have those wins to come back, there's 2 really big components to that. One has been the airport. Been able to secure about $10 million for the airport. We're getting a new baggage handling. They've been able to streamline security. So if you find it easier to go through the airport, you're welcome. We were able to champion those federal dollars to support operations at the airport, but also in the 15th Ward, which in the poorest part of Syracuse, we've been about $10 million of that 45 has gone towards the community. And, again, it's the Children's Rise Center. It's the redevelopment of East Adams neighborhoods and Brick City and a lot of that with the Syracuse Housing Authority. So we are able to have a much more direct impact connecting federal dollars to priorities of this area.
Yeah.
But hopefully that describes very clearly
the
difference and where we fit.
I can't imagine Yeah, it feels like such a daunting thing to become a congressman, to like step into that role in that position. Having never come from politics or being in a government position before, to them walking into that, we're going through the campaign process, which I'd imagine just from this current campaign is we get for some reason, I don't know why. My wife is a registered Democrat. I get all of her texts, all of her political texts and calls. I get hello to my cell phone. Hello, Rebecca. We hope that you can join us in joining, the campaign for Kamala Harris or for John Mannion or anything.
You are a modern man.
Yeah. All right. And anyways, but just getting all of the mailers from every level of the campaign, every office right now, it is wild to me how ugly some of them can get. I mean, I just got one for anti-Caleb Slater flyer in the mail, and I just remember there was just this terrible, terrible picture of him, and I just thought to myself, imagine running for office thinking you hope that you get elected, you can make a difference, and then one day in the mail this shows up, someone who's taken this thing and just completely made you out to be the worst person imaginable. I can't imagine dealing with just that.
Let me tell you two anecdotes on that to make that personal. First is when Stephanie and I go out on a date, which is not very often these days, unfortunately, we have to find a place that doesn't have televisions because we can't sit there and, have these horrible ads come up and, say these horrible and frankly untrue things about us, while we're sitting there trying to have a nice meal. And so that is, we take that with a grain of salt. It just comes with the territory. The second thing is I have 500 days at sea on a nuclear submarine. With 160 guys, I may or may not have liked a whole lot. And the culture on a submarine is your misery is our entertainment. And so for 80 days straight, I'll have people poke at you trying to find what gets under your skin. And as soon as they find something, the whole crew knows and everybody's in on it. And so, when I get trolled, which I often do by different people on politics, I just look at them and I smile and I think, you're an amateur. You have no idea what I've been through. And the truth is, the more you care about our country, the harder the job is of being in elected office. If you actually care, you tend to take it more personally. But the other side of it is, I'm okay with. I don't really pay attention to the criticism, and I try to listen to the people that. I'll tell you a story. I was visiting one of the residential high rises for the subsidized housing in Syracuse, and a woman came up to me and clearly distraught, and she said that her son had died in prison, and that she was unable to get information about his death, and even though she had tried, and she got some kind of cursory remarks, and she told me a bit of his background and the struggles that he'd had, and her granddaughter, his daughter, that was now being cared for, in her family, and I was able to go get some insight and some specific details about what had happened, and I came back and. Several weeks later, and was able to sit down with her in private and walk through these very difficult things. They were emotional things for her, traumatic things to hear some specifics about her son's passing. But it's one of the most satisfying things I've gotten to do in Congress because you can use the power of the office to really bless someone. And I've had a few opportunities to make a difference of someone traveling and is in crisis and they lost their passport and they have my cell number. And, I've gotten the embassy on the phone at 4 a.m. and they'll take my call. And so there's just a few chances to really serve people that's been incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. So I know we only have a few more minutes, and we haven't talked about food at all. but I'm more curious about because I'm incredibly curious about the farm. Do you all still have the farm where you are growing
yes.
truffles?
We do. So that's what brought us here 15 years ago is we have family in the area, and we moved to be close to family and to start this farm. And the farm came out of and this is, your readers and your listeners will really connect with this because, you travel to places like France or New Zealand and you see, farm to table and you think about, wow, what it'd be like to be part of that. So we did a lot of research. Stephanie and I did a lot of research, and there's some experimental methods for cultivating Burgundy truffles and different kinds of truffles on the roots of hazelnut trees.
Yeah.
And, we looked at vineyards, and vineyards require a lot of money. They require a lot of care and maintenance. And we felt like we weren't going to be able to put that in. We were looking for something that we could establish, maintain, but then, so anyway, that's what it sounded like when it was on paper.
Yeah.
And we planted 2,350 hazelnut trees ourselves. And simultaneously, we planted 10,000 lavender plants. And then pretty soon, Stephanie had 30 plus beehives. And while we were waiting for the hazelnut trees to develop, and these were hazelnuts that had been inoculated in the fungi spores of Burgundy truffles, our lavender and particularly our honey business really took off. And I mean, for Stephanie, and it was agritourism. Stephanie was on the Cayuga County Tourism Board. We had busloads of people that would come and she would teach them about bees. They would shop at our store, and it was an hour and a half, and we could make a lot of money in an hour and a half. So the agritourism kind of small farms approach is what we have found rewarding.
Yeah.
And Congress and life gets in the way. Stephanie's mom, for the last year of her life, lived with us for most of that, and had broken her hip and needed very intensive care that Stephanie could provide. So there's things, and any farmer will tell you that life gets in the way, and it's hard. So I would say that we've learned a lot. I think we've been blessed to be part of the farming community. We did a CSA. Community supported agriculture during COVID because it was just a way to connect with people. I think 19 families for 16 weeks, and we were able to pull in products from other local growers and and provide community and kind of an outlet for them because everybody was kind of frozen in place. So we've had some great experiences in the agricultural. I don't know that anybody's going to write a book on how to be successful in agriculture based on our experience, but I will say that we've learned a lot and done a lot.
Yeah, I used to work with Abbott Farms in Baldwinsville, and I work right now with Heritage Hill out in Pompey with Dan. And
Dan's great. I mean, that's I love going out there.
Yeah, it's I remember at Abbott Farms, actually, the similarities between Heritage Hill and Abbott's are very, very odd because both Dan and Warren Abbott were off the farm, not involved in the farm business, and not involved in the family farm. I believe both were in New York, both in finance, and then got called back to help take over the farm. When I was with the Abbotts, it was lots of kids, and none of them wanted to have anything to do with taking over the farm. And, Abbott's is apples and blueberries and pumpkins and all sorts of stuff, and a ton of property out in Baldwinsville that they've had to sell parcels off for, for whatever, to whomever, to keep the farm going throughout the years. But I would sometimes leave that farm at midnight and see Warren across the street with a headlamp on, rebuilding the strawberry fields, on his hands and knees. Or I would see his dad at 90 years old or 88, whatever it was, in the tractor going through the apple trees. I mean, it was the amount of work that about 3 people put into that farm was sobering to see. It's hospitality is always a very difficult business, and especially when you add in the farm element that is the main economic driver for your family, and you don't have the people, you don't have the hands, the laborers to help you out with it, and that just means you're up for 18 hours a day, sometimes working, farming to make sure everything's taken care of. That was pretty sobering to see.
I lost 20 pounds getting our farm started, so I could probably use that effort again.
So have you all had a harvest of truffles?
We've found truffles, and we've partnered with. There was a professor at ESF that was a mycologist that would come out and conduct studies and bring ESF students out and study the mycology or the fungal growth around there. We have a dog that's a Lagotto, nice. Beatrice, named out of Dante's Inferno. I think Beatrice was the guide, and so we've definitely been able to cultivate some, but it's politics and caring for family has made it difficult. Sure. Right as COVID started, we hosted a truffle hunting experience. Luke Houghton was our caterer and guest on that. So we did kind of a truffle-themed dinner at our farm and then went out and hunted truffles and, awesome. Really had a great experience. So the business model for small farms, again, as your listeners will know acutely well, is really the key. And that is, that's what we've had to...
for sure.
We had, truffle popcorn.
Oh, wow.
That was really good with dry strawberries. We had truffle short ribs and potato with truffle and then truffle ice cream. And I have to tell you, it was fantastic. Luke did a great job.
I got experiences like having you on the podcast, and earlier in the spring, there's the Fancy Food Show in New York City.
Yep, my wife's been.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So I didn't know it existed before this year. I got an email from a very large PR company, global PR company in the food space. And they hired me to go down and record podcasts with some of their clients on the showroom floor at the Fancy Food Show. And it was for it was 3 Italian food companies and then the region of Umbria, who had this massive, which, that's the truffle area, right?
Right.
And so I interviewed the Minister of Finance and Commerce, something like that, on the podcast. And then Matteo Frescobaldi from the Frescobaldi, 1,000-year-old wine company, and then Laudemio olive oil. So it was very surreal to be sitting there talking with the Minister of Commerce for the region of Umbria about truffles.
And now you've had the titan of truffles in Cayuga County.
Yeah.
Chemistry is very interesting. I mean, it is it is about the soil, and there are a number. I am told that there are some very significant investments in similar enterprises to ours around upstate New York that are mostly in stealth mode. And
there's a big one in Skinny Atlas, I think.
Could be.
Maybe, yeah. It's very interesting to think that, the possibility of that, especially on some sort of a scale, to make them, more accessible in the area. Because, that sounds like a very pretentious thing to say, more accessible.
Come out to the farm. We're now in hunting season. Okay. Stephanie has, trained our dog. You could do a podcast on that and come out and hunt truffles.
Yeah. I'll let you get going. Thank you so much.
After November 5th, please.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking time.
You bet, Anthony. Thank you. Thanks for letting me be here.